He ordered the materials that night, not cheap ones either. Tall, shadow box style made of reinforced wood, with a dark walnut stain. Not only did it comply with HOA height and privacy regulations, it pushed them to their limits. 10 feet tall, just enough to be within code. Just enough to block every inch of Dana's view. The construction started 3 days later. Michael made sure it was loud. Karen came walking down the side street with her sun hat on and clipboard in hand, her sunglasses perched on her nose like she was above the law. Donnie stood behind her, barefoot, holding a smoothie, and looking irritated that someone dared interrupt his lakeside vibes. "What exactly is that supposed to be?" Karen asked, pointing. Michael didn't look up from his hammer. "A fence, too tall. Not according to code 7.4 subsection D. You'd know. You wrote it." She stared, lips tightening. "You're being petty. You took my view. It's not your view." Michael nailed another board in without blinking. "Then it won't bother you when I block it." Karen's calm cracked just a little. She turned to Donnie, who looked over the rising wall with visible worry. Michael's fence was shooting up like a fortress stall, wide, solid, a complete visual barrier. By day 4, the entire side facing Donnie's lot was finished. By day 5, Michael had added planter boxes filled with fast-growing bamboo along the top edge, legally landscaping, practically a green wall of vengeance. Neighbors started whispering. People who once ignored Michael were now watching, curiously. Even a few board members started asking questions, not just about the fence, but about why Donnie was allowed to build on a lot designated for community open space. Karen tried to push back. She wrote him up for excessive noise, for using non-native vegetation, and claimed his bamboo posed a potential snake hazard. Each time, Michael responded with paperwork clear, legal, well-researched. He knew her rules better than she did now. But what Karen didn't know was that Michael had gone further. He'd filed a formal complaint with the zoning board. Attached to it, satellite images, original plot plans, and the 2011 developer agreement that clearly showed the shoreline had visual access. Protections for all lots bordering the water, including his. It wasn't just about the fence anymore. It was about what she'd violated. He never raised his voice, never lost his temper. He let his fence do the talking, and soon, the city would speak too. On the 7th day, just as he installed the final lighting strip along the top of the fence, an unmarked car pulled into the cul-de-sac. 2 people in suits stepped out, one holding a folder, the other a camera. They walked right past Michael and headed to Donnie's prefab unit. Michael didn't have to say a word. He just sipped his coffee and watched from behind his towering wall. He knew exactly what was coming next. And Karen. She had no idea the fence she hated was about to bury her in more ways than one. The 2 officials, one tall, one short, stood at Donnie's fence, quietly discussing measurements and snapping photos. Donnie tried to play casual, stepping outside in his robe, waving like they were old friends. But his forced grin cracked when the taller inspector pointed straight at the edge of his guest house, then gestured toward the lake. Karen stormed out. Minutes later, keys jangling, lipstick half done, trying to control the narrative before it slipped too far out of her hands. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" she demanded. The shorter official turned and spoke firmly. "City code inspection. We received a formal complaint with zoning irregularities and potential floodplain violations. Do you own this structure?" Karen hesitated. "No, that's my cousin's. But I approve the usage. Then you'll want to step aside while we complete our assessment." Michael sat quietly on his deck, high behind his wall, sipping from a new mug that read HOA Legend. He threw a legend. He didn't gloat out loud. He didn't need to. Every nail in that fence had been a chapter in the story that was unfolding now on. Karen never expected to be written by someone like him. The officials spent nearly an hour there. They walked the full perimeter, took notes, and pulled out what looked like a drone, sending it into the air to map the lot from above. Donnie had long since retreated indoors, peeking through the blinds like a criminal during a police raid. Karen, red-faced and rattled, tried her usual charm, offering bottled water, printed documents, anything that might soften the blow. But the officials didn't even look at her. They weren't here for smiles. They were here for facts. Later that afternoon, a yellow notice appeared on Donnie's fence: pending violation, construction in protected floodplain zone, subject to review. Michael waited until the sun dipped behind the horizon before stepping out of his gate and walking past Karen's house. She was in the driveway with Donnie, arguing, waving her arms. He didn't eavesdrop, but the words emergency meeting and liability floated just loud enough to catch in the wind. The next day, the HOA called for a closed-door emergency board session, something that hadn't happened since the clubhouse mold fiasco in 2018. Michael didn't attend. He didn't need to. What he needed was already done. But what he didn't expect was that his fence had done more than just block a view. It had started a chain reaction. Several neighbors had noticed their own lot lines being quietly redrawn over the past year. Small shifts, 2 feet here, 5 feet there. Always according to the HOA's master plan. But now they were suspicious. Now they started pulling documents. One even knocked on Michael's door asking how he found the city zoning maps. Karen, once the untouchable queen of the neighborhood, was suddenly dodging emails, answering angry phone calls and begging the board to stay united. And then came the letter. Michael received it 2 days later, official letterhead from the city inspector's office. It confirmed that the structure built on the green belt was in violation of 3 ordinances. It was deemed temporary and illegal. Pending hearing, it would be subject to removal. The kicker? The HOA, not Donnie, was listed as the responsible party. He posted the letter to the neighborhood group chat without a caption. Within minutes, his phone buzzed non-stop. Emojis, claps, memes of Karen behind a plastic fence. Someone even edited a drone shot showing his giant wall with the phrase checkmate. But Michael wasn't smiling yet. Not fully, because he knew Karen, and she wasn't done. She would fight back, and when she did, she'd make it personal. Karen wasn't the type to lick her wounds in silence. 3 days after the violation notice went up, she struck back. A letter arrived in Michael's mailbox, stamped with the HOA seal, declaring his new fence aesthetic non-compliant with sectional harmony requirements. It demanded removal of the upper trim, the bamboo planter, his lighting strip within 10 days or face $250 daily fines. He laughed. It wasn't a real rule, just a vague, easily twisted clause buried deep in the HOA's massive binder, something Karen had likely dug up in desperation. But it was enough to harass him, to remind him that she still had power, even if it was slipping through her fingers. Michael didn't take it lightly. He knew that a war like this wasn't one with fences alone, it was one with patience, paper, and pressure. He filed an appeal, citing the original materials in the approved architectural submission, along with time-stamped photos and signed receipts. Every petty move she made, he met with strategy, but behind the paperwork, something darker brewed. Late one evening, as Michael sat inside watching old reruns, a noise startled him. It wasn't loud, just a metallic clink. He stood, went to his side window, and watched. A flashlight beam flickered near his back fence. He grabbed his phone and quietly stepped onto his porch. Camera recording. What he saw made his blood turn cold. Donnie holding a tool in one hand, standing near the far end of the fence, jiggling something. It took a few seconds for Michael to realize what he was trying to do. Loosen a section of the wood panels. The intent was clear: create a weak spot in the structure, then report it as hazardous to force a teardown. But Donnie didn't know Michael had reinforced that entire stretch with internal steel rods. Michael flicked on the porch light, and Donnie jumped like a cat, dropping the tool with a clatter. Lose something, Michael called out. Donnie mumbled something about just checking the line, then hurried off into the darkness. The next morning, Michael filed a trespassing report with the local precinct. It wasn't an arrest, but it was a shot across the bow. One Karen couldn't ignore. By now, half the neighborhood had turned against her. Whispers turned into calls. Old board members started questioning the allocation of HOA funds. An anonymous flyer appeared at the community center, titled, "Where's Your Dues Really Going?" complete with charts and Karen's signature on obscure maintenance invoices that no one could explain. Michael didn't print the flyer, but he knew who did. Susan Lambert, former board secretary, sharp as a whip, and one of the few people Karen had pushed out years ago in a quiet internal vote. She showed up at Michael's doorstep 2 days later, holding a folder, her expression a mix of smugness and purpose. "I kept copies," she said simply. "Karen buried them, but I made backups. If what you're doing exposes her, count me in." Inside the folder were meeting transcripts, email threads, and receipts. One stood out, a document from 3 years ago, showing the HOA had loaned itself money to pre-develop open spaces for future housing. Signatures included Karen's and, shockingly, Donnie's. He wasn't just a cousin crashing for free. He was on the books. And that meant this wasn't about backyard views anymore. It was fraud. Michael stared at the folder in silence. The game had changed. He wasn't just fixing a fence anymore. He was standing at the edge of a much deeper hole, one Karen had dug herself into over years of unchecked control. And now, she was cornered, but cornered animals, they bite. Karen wasn't backing down, she was doubling down. 2 days after Susan handed Michael the folder, flyers began appearing on doorsteps. They weren't handwritten or anonymous like before. These were glossy, full-color leaflets titled, "The Truth About Michael Green." Underneath the bold red letters, there was a photo of Michael looking stern in front of his house. Taken without his permission, the flyer accused him of spying on neighbors, harassing HOA staff, and building a structure without full architectural approval. It even called him a threat to community peace. He stared at the flyer in disbelief, then watched from his window as Karen herself handed copies out like they were holiday cards. Donnie trailed behind her, acting as her lackey, stuffing flyers into mailboxes while avoiding eye contact. But Michael didn't panic. He scanned the flyer, printed 5 clean copies, and emailed them straight to his attorney. Because hidden in the fine print, Karen had made a mistake. The HOA had used funds for these flyers. It wasn't a private smear campaign. It was paid for with dues, money, and that crossed a legal line. The next morning, Michael filed a formal complaint with the state's HOA Oversight Committee. But before the storm could reach her, Karen made one more move. A notice appeared on the HOA website. Special board meeting member misconduct hearing. The target, Michael Green. They were calling a vote to censure him. The hearing would take place at the community clubhouse, and for the first time in 5 years, the meeting would be open to all residents. Michael arrived early. The clubhouse, usually quiet and half empty, buzzed with tension. Folding chairs filled up quickly. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years now whispered, pointing, arguing softly. Karen sat at the head of the long table, gavel in hand, flanked by 3 remaining board members, 1 loyal to her, 2 visibly nervous. She opened the meeting with her usual icy confidence. "We are here today to vote on disciplinary action against Mr. Michael Green for violating multiple HOA standards and disrupting community harmony." Michael stood calmly, papers in hand. "I'd like to respond." Karen hesitated but nodded. Briefly, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't wave his papers in the air. He simply handed out copies to the attending residents, proof of zoning violations, the city's letter, photos of Donnie trespassing, and finally, the most damning page of all, the HOA ledger showing Donnie receiving payment as a contractor for work never approved. Murmurs filled the room. Karen's smile vanished. "I'm not the one who misused HOA funds," Michael said. "I'm not the one who hired family under fake titles, or who signed off on illegal construction in a floodplain. I didn't lie about property lines. But if you want to vote me out, go ahead. Just know I'm already talking to the state." Gasps echoed. The 2 nervous board members exchanged a glance. Karen tried to speak, but they cut her off. "I motion to suspend the vote," one of them said. "I believe we need legal review before proceeding." Karen slammed her gavel. "You can't just..." But the room turned. Hands went up in agreement. The residents were no longer whispering, they were shouting, demanding clarity, receipts, explanations. The vote never happened. Instead, the board declared an emergency audit of HOA finances. Karen stood frozen, her eyes darting around the room. For the first time, she looked small. After the meeting, Susan approached Michael with a smirk. "That was satisfying," Michael nodded. "It's not over. But now the right people are finally watching." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the clubhouse windows. The storm Karen tried to bring was heading straight for her. The neighborhood felt different after the meeting. A shift in the air, quiet at first, but sharp, like the pause before a thunderclap. Karen had retreated from the public eye, her usual HOA email signature now replaced with an automatic reply. "Out of office, personal emergency." But Michael didn't believe in coincidences. He kept working, quietly, methodically. His fence stood strong, casting its long shadow over Donnie's illegal guest house. The yellow violation notice still hung on Donnie's property like a scarlet letter. Most neighbors now avoided the lot altogether, whispering as they passed by. But that didn't mean Karen had surrendered. Her silence was the most dangerous part. One evening, Michael returned from the store to find something strange. The back panel of his fence, one that faced the lake, was soaked, not just damp from rain, but warped and splintering, as if drenched in a chemical dot. He walked closer. The wood was soft, bubbling from beneath the stain. A thin trail of something oily glistened down the edge. Someone had poured acid or solvent on his fence, and they did it from Donnie's side. Michael didn't hesitate. He installed cameras that night, hidden, silent, facing both his fence and the alley behind Donnie's lot. If they tried again, he'd catch them red-handed. But what he caught instead was worse. 3 nights later, at 2:47 a.m., motion alerts pinged his phone. Michael opened the live feed. A shadow moved across the back of the fence, too short to be Karen or Donnie, a teenager. No, it was Karen's daughter Emily, who'd up flashlight off. Holding what looked like a bucket, she crept to the edge, poured liquid onto the wood, and disappeared into the darkness. Michael sat stunned. Karen hadn't sent her cousin this time. She'd sent her own daughter. The next morning, Michael didn't call the police. Not yet. Instead, he sent the footage to Susan and 3 other board members who had started meeting privately about removing Karen permanently. Within the hour, Susan called him. Her voice was tense. "You need to see this." She forwarded an email chain Karen had mistakenly sent to the entire board. In it, she was urging her inner circle to tighten control of HOA procedures, including a budget rail to legal preparation. Legal for what? Then came the twist. Karen had secretly hired an outside law firm using HOA funds without board approval to draft a lawsuit against Michael. The plan was to accuse him of defamation and property damage to distract from the audit, but it was too late. That same afternoon, a notice went out to all residents. An emergency recall vote was scheduled. The board was no longer protecting Karen. Michael stayed out of sight, letting the process unfold. But the neighborhood buzzed. People began sharing their own complaints: misused funds, unreasonable fines, silenced disputes. Some residents even confessed to being afraid of Karen for years, but never had proof until now. And then came something no one expected. A whistleblower. An email from a blocked address hit the inboxes of the HOA, the board, and even local news. Attached was a document labeled HOA_supplemental_fund_fraud_2019-224.xlsx. It showed 5 years of financial manipulation, inflated landscaping bills, payments to shell companies, and forged maintenance receipts. Every signature was Karen's and Donnie's name, all over it. Michael stared at the spreadsheet, heart pounding. It wasn't just misconduct, it was criminal. The fence had started this battle, but now it had turned into a wildfire, and Karen Shinich was standing in the middle, with nowhere left to run. By sunrise, the spreadsheet was everywhere. Screenshots of forged invoices and fake company names raced through neighborhood group chats. A local blog even picked up the story, calling it the fence that brought down an HOA queen. The headline alone was enough to make Michael shake his head in disbelief. But he didn't celebrate. Not yet. He'd seen what people like Karen do when they start to drown. They don't go quietly. They grab anyone on the way down. And sure enough, the next day, the HOA's lawyers sent Michael a letter. Karen had officially filed a civil defamation claim against him. It was weak, thin, nothing that would hold in court. But it didn't have to. The goal wasn't to win, it was to drag him down with her. Michael forwarded the letter to his own lawyer, who assured him the case was baseless. She's trying to stall the audit, delay the recall vote. Typical last-ditch garbage. But Michael knew better than to relax, especially when Donnie disappeared. His guest house went dark. The lights never came on. The car vanished from the driveway. When one of the neighbors casually asked Karen where Donnie had gone, she said he'd left on vacation. No one believed her. Michael guessed what really happened. Donnie had bolted. He'd seen the audit coming and didn't want to be in the blast radius. But Karen wasn't done fighting. The recall vote was just 3 days away. And that's when she made her most dangerous move. She called a town hall meeting, not an official one. A community gathering. She called it, held at the clubhouse courtyard. She sent out emails, and left printed flyers on doorsteps again, claiming she would expose the real criminal behind the HOA chaos. Michael debated whether to show up. Susan warned him not to. She's going to try and smear you, maybe even fake evidence. Stay home, let her dig her own grave. But he didn't stay home. He stood in the back row, silent, arms crossed, watching. Karen stood up front in a white blazer, microphone in hand, smiling like nothing had happened. Her speech was all spin, how she had dedicated her life to the HOA, how she never took a dollar she didn't earn, how Michael was dangerous, obsessive, and probably behind the anonymous whistleblower file. Then, she dropped what she thought was her ace, a printed email chain between Michael and Susan, old ones months ago, where they casually discussed HOA rules and strategies for pressuring the board. Taken out of context, they looked manipulative. She held them up like trophies. This man Michael Green has been orchestrating a takeover from the start. He used his fence as bait to unravel years of hard work. I have proof of collusion, harassment, and misinformation. For a second, the crowd went quiet, and then Susan walked up front, calmly, confidently. She took the mic from Karen's hand without asking. I sent those emails, she said, and I'll send more if you like. Because unlike you, I didn't. Delete the ones that show you signing fake bids, approving payments to your own cousin, and altering vote tallies. The audit team has everything. You want proof? Wait 3 days. Karen's face flushed. Her eyes darted across the crowd. Realizing finally that no one was defending her, no one was clapping, not even the board. She stepped back, lips tight, eyes glassy. For the first time, she looked afraid. Michael met her eyes from the back of the crowd. She held his gaze for a second, and then turned and walked off stage. Just like that. No words, no apology, just silence. But Michael knew this wasn't the end, because sometimes, the most dangerous moves come after you think the game's already over. The audit report arrived like thunder. 30-8 pages. Names, signatures, transactions, over $47,000 in undocumented expenses traced back to Karen's tenure. Everything from equipment rentals to consulting fees, all funneled to either Donnie or obscure LLCs that no one could trace beyond a PO box in another county. The final paragraph hit like a hammer, based on submitted evidence. The HOA president, Karen Simmons, acted in direct violation of fiduciary responsibility. Immediate removal recommended, pending member recall vote. The board didn't wait. They called the vote within 24 hours. Karen was officially removed by a 91% majority. She never showed up. Her white SUV vanished from the neighborhood the next morning, leaving only dust and a foreclosure sign on Donnie's illegal guest house. The city scheduled its demolition within 2 weeks. The fence would stay, but the concrete slab and walls would be torn down, at HOA expense. Michael stood in his yard, watching it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. The fence that started it all remained exactly where he built it, untouched, tall, proud, and now, ironically, a historical artifact of neighborhood rebellion. Neighbors began thanking him. Some dropped off baked goods. Others offered to help stain the fence as a symbol of unity. Kids even called it the Great Wall of Green. Michael laughed, accepting it all with grace. But something still didn't sit right. The way Karen had fought not just for control, but specifically for the green belt behind Michael's house had never made sense. There were dozens of undeveloped patches in the neighborhood. Why this one? Why his? Susan called 2 days later with an answer. Michael, you might want to come see this. He met her in the HOA archive room, a musty space in the back of the clubhouse, filled with old boxers, blueprints, and dusty filing cabinets. She pulled out a rolled-up map dated 1995, the original developer's layout of the community. It showed something no one else had noticed, because it had never been scanned into digital records. A faint red square marked Lot X37, a sliver of waterfront land, never developed, sitting directly behind Michael's property line. Karen knew about this. Susan whispered, "This lot was never officially absorbed into HOA common area. It was privately purchased 30 years ago." Michael frowned. "By who?" Susan handed him a brittle envelope. Inside, a yellowing title deed owner Thomas Simmons' father. Michael's chest tightened. She was trying to reclaim it. She wasn't just protecting Donnie, Susan said softly. She thought that land was still hers. Maybe she believed if she pushed you far enough, you'd sell. Or she could reclaim the title by force through zoning manipulation. That fence didn't just block her cousin's view, it blocked her legacy. Michael sat back in the chair, stunned. Everything suddenly made sense. The fake bylaws, the sudden rezoning, the smear campaign. It wasn't about HOA control, it was about family inheritance. Karen believed that lakefront peace was hers to protect, no matter who stood in the way, but she hadn't counted on the law, or the paper trail, or the one man with enough stubbornness and a nail gun to stop her. Michael filed a title challenge the next day. With Karen removed and her fraudulent actions exposed, the city nullified the HOA's claim to Lot X37. It officially reverted to the last verified property owner. Michael Green, he didn't just get his view back, he now owned the land behind it. The battle was over. Or so he thought, because that night, as he locked up, he noticed a single envelope taped to his door. No return address. Just one word written across it. Appeal. Michael stared at the envelope like it might explode. Appeal. The word was handwritten, shaky but deliberate, almost like it had been written with pressure instead of ink. He opened it slowly, expecting a last-ditch threat or a court summons, but it wasn't from a lawyer, it was from Karen herself, typed in 12-point font, no header, no signature, just a short letter that read more like a confession than a legal challenge. "You think you've won? But this wasn't about Donnie. It was about my father's land. He died believing it would stay in our family. You don't know what it meant to him. You don't know what it meant to me. I made mistakes, but I didn't lie about everything. There are things buried deeper than you realize. You only think the land is yours. You'll find out soon." Michael read it twice, then a third time. It didn't sound like a threat, it sounded like a warning. The next day, Michael visited the county clerk's office again, asking for any additional records on Lot X37. The clerk, already familiar with the HOA drama, dug through archives until he found something: a deed addendum, handwritten and unsigned, filed years after the original purchase. The addendum mentioned something strange: access rights reserved by original developer, contingent upon mineral rights beneath parcel X37. Mineral rights. Michael hadn't seen anything about that before. He dug deeper. Back at home, he called Susan. She remembered something buried in one of the old board-minute stock of an underground pipe system installed when the lake was man-made. A stormwater bypass tunnel, abandoned, forgotten. Flashlight in hand, Michael followed the lower slope behind the fence to the shoreline edge. Most of the area was soft grass and reeds, but one corner near, a cluster of boulders, sounded hollow when he stepped on it. He brushed back the weeds and uncovered what looked like an old metal hatch, rusted shut and half buried in earth. With effort, he pried it open. A damp staircase led downward into darkness. The air smelled like wet concrete and time. He hesitated, then descended. At the bottom, he found a tunnel, cracked, forgotten, but still intact. Old maintenance lights lined the wall. Most long dead? He walked slowly, boots echoing, and then, about 30 feet in, he saw it. A sealed room. Concrete walls. Inside, crates, old HOA, maintenance gear, and a large metal storage box, stamped with the Simmons family seal. He opened it. Inside were blueprints, water flow data, survey records from the 80s of 80s that the HOA had once planned to divert floodwater beneath the community. The tunnel had been abandoned when costs ran too high, but more importantly, the land above it, including Michael's new lot, was once registered as a not-buildable overflow zone. Karen wasn't just holding on to family memory. She was guarding a secret. If that land ever flooded and damaged nearby homes, the owner could be liable. Michael froze. Was this what Karen meant? He took photos, logged coordinates, and closed the hatch behind him. Back home, he emailed everything to both his lawyer and the new HOA board. They acted fast, petitioning the city to reclassify the land as a designated storm buffer, protected from development and exempt from personal liability. It meant Michael couldn't build on it, but it also meant Karen's hold was finished. No inheritance, no secret tunnel, no leverage, just a memory and a monument to the mess she left behind. A week later, Donnie's guest house was demolished. The lot was cleared, and the HOA released an official apology to the neighborhood. Michael stood at his fence one last time. Beyond it, peace. The lake shimmered again. Birds flew as they always had. And in the silence, one thing became clear. The fence didn't just block chaos, it contained it. And in the end, it wasn't revenge that won. It was patience, proof, and one well-placed wall. The end.